Expired. I call David Clinton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Kia ora koutou. Mr Speaker, I must say it's a pleasure to speak to such a full House this evening, and some could unkindly suggest that such a good turnout from the government members suggests they might have too few opportunities for entertainment on a Saturday night and too little else to do with their lives, but I'm sure that's not the case. So this is a bill that the Green Party perhaps would have liked to support, but there are two compelling reasons why we could not. One of those being that the bill, particularly in its original drafting, was clearly intended to be a tool of the minister, a creature of the minister. It was clear from the language about direction of work program, direction of frame in terms of reference, that the notion of independence would have been not real. The second, to be fair, the bill has improved in that regard considerably, but the second, and I think compelling reason not to support this bill, one can reflect on the last contribution from the chair of the Select Committee, where in 10 minutes gave a very succinct and a very powerful analysis of most of the reasons, or many of the reasons, for low productivity in this country. The reality is we actually know the reasons and we know the problems, and we also have a handle on some of the potential solutions. And arguably the last thing we need is another government body to do research. That might be a useful addition at some point, but there are a great many things we could do in the meantime that do not require $5 million a year, 25 public servants and extended investigations to do. It's been noted there's some irony in the fact that this solution to the perceived problem of lack of productivity has been a legislative or indeed a bureaucratic solution to what's seen as an economic or social problem. And it's just, as I say, ironic that that has come from the party who are so overtly the party of pro-business, anti-government, one might say. I guess one of our major concerns with the wording, the content of this bill, is the lack of prescription about what the Commission ought to do. And that's a two-edged sword. The lack of prescription, the very broad brush statements about the purpose and capacity of the Commission, that could be a form of freedom, and it could indeed create an opportunity for the Commission to do work across a wide range of topics, a wide range of communities, that it could do a great deal of innovative and creative work. But in the absence of any requirement for it to do that, the very breadth of the statements, the very breadth of the purpose, can equally as well make this Commission the creature of the minister. In the Australian example, and we've heard a great deal about the extent to which this Commission, this legislation, is modelled on the Australian example. Nowhere, however, unlike the Australian example, do we see reference to regional development. Critically, we see nothing about ecological sustainability, which is one of the requirements in front of the Australian Commission. There's a statement in the Australian legislation that talks about overcoming Indigenous disadvantage. Ecological sustainability, overcoming Indigenous disadvantage, promoting understanding of issues bearing on community living standards. These are serious and major issues that could as well be confronted and dealt with in New Zealand as the Australian Commission is required to do. It would be a very brave and a very well-resourced Commission who would undertake investigation into something like overcoming Indigenous disadvantage in New Zealand. It would require significant resource. It would require the blessing of the Minister at least. And we feel very strongly that in the realpolitik world that no such mandate would be given, no such capacity would be allowed to the Commission to do that necessary and useful work. It's interesting that there's no definition of productivity in this bill, and we know that that word is amenable to a whole range of definitions. In the briefing papers made available to the Select Committee, there was a notion that productivity is intended to be defined broadly, capturing effectiveness, efficiency and innovation. And clearly innovation is a critical factor in turning our economy around, in creating more well-being and getting some sustainable growth. And productivity is one of the issues that will inform that. Innovation can come from large organisations. It very often comes from quite small, very tight, well-driven and well-managed organisations. And there's lots of examples of that within the SME sector. And yes, Mr Hayes, 10 minutes is allotted. I understand your enthusiasm to leave, but bear with me, please. There are some inspired tinkerers in this country. We have the likes of Mr John Britton, the late lamented Mr Brisson. There have been numerous examples where very talented individuals have created opportunities, have created work, have created benefits in this country. The need for the Commission. It's interesting to reflect on some of the statistics about labour productivity that came from the Statistics Department earlier this year. And it's interesting to note that between 1986 and 2008, in fact, New Zealand's productivity, labour productivity overall, grew faster than Australia's, to the extent New Zealand over that time we saw something like a 2.5% growth in labour productivity, where in Australia 2.1%. Drilling into those numbers a little finds the trap of averaging, of course. We know that New Zealand's productivity grew some 3.2% a year compared with Australia's 2% between 1986 and 1996. The situation reversed somewhat from 1996 to 2008. Labour productivity in New Zealand dropped at 1.9 and grew in Australia to some 2.3%. So we can engage with some of the potential explanations for that turnaround, and they have been touched on earlier this evening. The fact that in the 80s we saw a massive unemployment emerge in this country, and that is one way to increase productivity, but it's not a useful way, it's not a sustainable way, it's not a way we ought to emulate or go back to. Peter Mair, the CEO of Navman, one of New Zealand's major technology company successors, has identified the value and the fact that the old public service, the old much maligned public service, actually had a major role in providing skills for the economy. A great many of the people we now find working on super yachts and in the manufacture of high quality super yachts in New Zealand owe their basic training to the Navy. There are still people in senior positions in telecom, in Genai, who did their basic training with the old post office. Nowhere in our economy have we got those same large-scale training grounds, and this is leading to a fall-off in our skills base, especially in the technology area. The 1990s, New Zealand, about the point that the relative growth in productivity in our two countries, in Australia and New Zealand. 1990s, there was a deliberate and sustained effort to drive down incomes in New Zealand, to cut salaries and wages, to cut benefits, at the same time where Australia was investing heavily in labour programs and easing out and building strength into that economy in a way that did not happen here in New Zealand. I've made the point that we know what some of the solutions are already. We don't need long-winded investigations. At this point, it's hard to see the necessity to establish an organisation dedicated to finding out what is the problem when we already know what many of the problems are. Underinvestment in research is a major difficulty in this country. We continue to be burdened. Our education sector has a millstone around its neck called the PBRF, which rewards academics who do research that can get published in esoteric international journals, but positively punishes academics who do work that is of practical value here in New Zealand. Academics who undertake practical, grounded research that informs practice in New Zealand are not rewarded, whilst academics who do, as I say, esoteric research get published in a journal that will be read by 20 people around the world, that is being rewarded in a way that other things are not.
Order.
I'll comment briefly on the appointment of the chair of the Commission, and we do wonder why you would appoint a chair before the legislation has passed. That man has a long and honourable career, a 35-year career in the public service. And one wonders why you would put at the head of a commission that will require new thinking, innovation, that will require engagement, critically with the private sector, the business sector. Why would you put a person heading towards the end of his career with 35 years in the Reserve Bank, in Treasury and briefly in MAF? where is the skill set that will develop a culture of innovation, of challenge? Because that is critically what a commission, a productivity commission would need. Someone who will push the boundaries, break the boundaries, and with all due respect to a long and honourable career in the public service, that is not where I would have gone searching for such a leader.